for putting us on. Just great couple of days. Really looking forward to it. I've been lucky enough to be involved in open source for a long time. In fact, I like to say open source before it was open source. I started writing free software in 1985, and I try to do the math there a little bit. I don't want to do the math there. 1985. So that was the first time I wrote software that I released under the GPL on the internet, and got to play with some great stuff. And you got Scott McNeely coming tomorrow, and Scott. Don't tell him this, but don't know if he's listening or not. But when I was at Stanford in the late 80s, I ended up being the system administrator for our research group. And one of the things that, one of the reasons was I was always the guy that was just happy to do whatever. I'd go out and find the software to get it done. I'd put whatever together. I always had that kind of hands-on, do whatever need to be done kind of attitude. And you end up being the system administrator, those of you who've been there, because no one else wants to do it. They turn to you and you say, well, I'll figure it out, right? I used to have this big, external disk drive that I would carry around. And everything we did, of course, at Stanford was on Sun workstations. But the funny thing was we'd get one of those machines in, and of course, all the software that came with it was free, as in free beer, right? We didn't have to pay for it, but it wasn't open source. Well, first thing we'd do is we'd take that machine, I'd bring this disk drive over to it, I'd plug it in, and I'd start replacing all that software we got for free for the stuff that we downloaded off the internet for free that was open source, or that time free software, GPL. Why we do that? Because the stuff we got off the internet was better than what shipped on that box. It wasn't about how much we had to pay for something. We got the software we wanted for $0. It was about using what was better. And that's why I got involved in open source, because for me it was about creating great software. And I got involved and have been part of this for a long time because I'm passionate about creating great software, great product. And I think open source does that the best. In fact, it gives you the control to do that. I want to tell you a little story here. Who here has written a line of code that's gone into open source? Anybody? That's pretty good. That's good. That's good. That's good. One of the things that I found that everybody that's been involved in open source has some story or set of stories or one or more compelling moments that they can point back to and just explain to them why they care about it. And they can be really simple stories. They can be great, big, complex things. The simplest ones often hit the closest to home. I want to tell you one of mine. In the early 90s, I don't know, 91, 92, I was starting a company called VA Linux, and we were in the Linux workstation business. Well, we need to run the business, and the business software that you used to keep track of your accounting was QuickBooks. Okay, runs on Windows. So we had a Windows network there. We ran QuickBooks on it, and we had a set of machines and little network and printers and such. And I remember one day setting up printing in QuickBooks, and I went into I set up the network printer, went to print, the thing crashed. Okay, and I started playing around with it, and it's not much you can do. It's a black box. And that's the thing about proprietary software. It's a black box. So I started playing around with it, and I discovered that if the network printer name was 11 characters or less, it worked. And if it was 12 characters or more, it crashed. I already see a few people smiling, right? Okay, anybody tell me why? This is running on Windows, DOS, right? File names. Those of you that are old, like me, remember when DOS had 8 plus 3 character file names, eight characters and three character extension, right? 11 characters. Okay, now, those of you that are programmers, I want you to imagine that piece of Intuit software. Why is it crashing? There's a buffer overflow. There's an 11 character buffer sitting in there. When it's 12 characters long, it overflows that buffer, the darn thing crashes. I am thrilled. I'm a programmer, right? Of course, this thing's a black box to me. I can't do anything. I mean, how hard can that be to fix? How hard can it be to change the length of that buffer, fix this problem, right? So I go, I know what I'll do. I'll call Intuit. I'll call support. No problem. This is easy. I know exactly what the problem is. I'm going to call support, right? So I get on the phone. I literally tried this. I know I was young and naive. I get on the phone, and I called up tech support into it. And I said, I'm trying to print to a network printer, and it's crashing. First response I get is, we don't support network printers. And I said, no, you don't understand. If it's longer than 11 characters, and I started trying to explain the bug, and no, I'm sorry, we don't support network printers. That's it. And I got so frustrated with that. And to this day, I still remember that moment of feeling completely helpless, of sitting there, knowing the problem, knowing with 99.9% accuracy that I could probably fix this pretty easily. I mean, I'm not the world's greatest C programmer, so I don't write code anymore, right? But I can find a buffer in there and increase that by a couple of characters. I can at least do that. And knowing and finding that and just being unable to do it just drove me crazy. That kind of stuff still drives me crazy. And it's that level of control that open source gives you that really, I think makes the difference. It's that control to be able to fix things if you need to take something in the direction you need to own your own destiny, right? That to me is the big difference with open source and proprietary software. I mean, you get things like that fixed and you don't come across that. So anyway, everyone I know has one of those little stories. I encourage you to treasure and keep those and remember those little stories. Some of them are very small, some of them are very large. We all have them, and they become turning points and things that we remember. But that's one of those points I remember about sort of compelling me and really telling me, gee, you don't have control with unless you have the code. So with that, I'm going to step into a couple of things here. I don't have a lot of time left. I used it all up in my stories. But I'm going to flip you through a few slides here. We'll talk. We'll see how much time we have. If I were to ask you, what are three? I live in the Silicon Valley area. We're used to seeing technology trends and buzzwords. So, three key trends, three buzzwords that you hear driving technology today. What are you going to say to me? Yell some out. Cloud. Okay, we got cloud. That was easy. Mobile. I heard mobile. Big data is good, but it's not on my list today. Social. So, okay. So let's talk about mobile, social, and cloud. Okay, three big. What's something that's common about them? We didn't throw out the words open source, did we? Isn't that interesting? Well, yes and no. Let's talk about this a little bit. Open source and mobile to start. So this is a chart that shows you smartphone market share over time for the past 2 years. Okay, and you can see, RIM is that one going way down, BlackBerry. Apple's that one coming up. There's one missing on that chart. I'm going to throw it up here on the next chart. Yeah, Android. Isn't that amazing? Do you realize last year that Apple and Samsung sold almost the same number of smartphone devices? That's just Samsung. Doesn't count all the other Motorola, all the other HTC, all the other Android device manufacturers out there as well. So, maybe open source is behind this mobile trend. And I would argue, in fact, that mobile is increasing the demand for open source. And in fact, what we're seeing as mobile drives, there is more use of open source. So let's take that. So that first trend, mobile. What's driving it? Open source. Would you see those kind of numbers without open source? Would we have Android without open source? Open source enables all of that. You look at all the tablets and other devices that are being enabled by open source, driving mobile. Social. Let's talk about social a little bit. Okay? Assume everybody here, we already mentioned Twitter once. Let's see, anybody post to Facebook while we're in the middle of this? Yeah, okay, so people are already posting on Facebook during this. You probably recognize the LinkedIn and Wikipedia logos up there as well, right? Okay, well, 800,000 users as of December, 11% of the world population. And of course, you go to the Facebook pages, and what can you see there? They talk about open source. What enabled and built Facebook? PHP. I love Facebook as an example. So I'm a SugarCRM now. We're a PHP application. People go, PHP scale? I don't know. 800 million users, 800 million users, 11% of the world population. Okay, that works. LinkedIn, open source, enabled as well. 150 million users, only 2% of the population. Okay, so a little bit less target, 150 million. Wikipedia, free web-based wiki software built on MediaWiki. Again, open source, enabling this. Finally, Twitter. You go to Twitter developers. You got your open source page. Twitter is built on open source from the back end to the front end. Twitter engineers use, contribute to, and release a lot of open source software. So maybe social is increasing the demand for open source as well. And social equals more use of open source. So there we go, that second big trend. What is behind it? What drives it? What's enabling it? Wouldn't have this trend without open source as an enabling technology. So remember that. Finally, let's talk about open source and cloud. You guys can see where this one's going, right? Well, for a while there, I kept getting these questions about, does cloud mean the end of open source? Easy, cheap, free software. We don't need software anymore because it's all out in the cloud. Well, gee, what do you use to run those clouds? What are those cloud providers using? I mean, you go to Amazon, go to Rackspace. What are we built on? We're all built on open source, right? We would not have cloud computing today as we know it today without open source. And it isn't just the technology. Open source drove the licensing. Amazon would not have been able to put up virtual machines with an operating system that they could charge for by the minute, by the hour, were it not for the flexible licensing scheme that you have in open source. The pressure of that enabled them to convince proprietary vendors that they had to come up with licensing schemes that also allowed people to pay as you go for proprietary software, right? So open source is enabling all that. What are cloud users actually running out there? We did a little private data survey to look at what kinds of VMs people actually spin up on the cloud services. Overwhelmingly, Linux VMs. Okay? People are running, when you're running in the cloud, what are you running? You're running open source. Cloud is increasing the demand for open source, and in my mind, cloud, these easy to provision, widely available, ubiquitous server resources are driving and increasing the adoption of open source. So again, that other big trend, where did it come from? How do we get there? What's enabling it? Open source. So, mobile, social, cloud, when you hear those three buzzwords, when people talk about that, remind people what's driving mobile. What's the fastest growing mobile platform? Android, open source. Social, what's powering all of those social websites that people are going to every day? When you're tweeting, when you're posting on Facebook, what's driving all that? What's powering it? It's open source. When you're out there on the cloud, when someone's spinning the VM, when they're running on Amazon, when they're running out on Rackspace, what are they spinning up? They're running on open source. They're spinning up open source servers. So let's remember to remind people of that as we look at those trends in the industry today. I think people have forgotten a little bit that open source is what's driving and enabling all of this technology. That's what we need to remind people of. So, one of the things I like to say there, and I'll remind you, the future is open here. The future is a path to open source, and you've got a chance to go down a couple of roads there. the vendor lock-in road or the open road. So remember, as you go down that path, go down the open road. So with that, one more thing here, which is I do run I run a company. I guess I have a day job, as you would say it. A company called SugarCRM, and I'm going to do a quick pitch, just tell you who our business is. We are the largest provider of open source customer relationship management software. The company's been around since 2004. The pitch I want to make to you today is that we're hiring. So come and look for us. We're about 270 people, 275 people today, growing to 300 plus by the end of the year. Got a lot of open recs. I need engineers. So if there are any people out there, we're definitely hiring. Come talk to us. So thank you. I think I got a couple of minutes. I'd be happy to take a couple of questions before we have to wrap this up. Questions? People in the audience, come on. No, we're right here. Go ahead, I can hear you. I'll repeat it. Well, you know, the nice thing is they talk about them some. So if you go to other open source conferences, you see them show up often in recruiting, right? And but they don't talk about it as much and promote it. Google's pretty good. Google's got their open source program office run by Chris DeBona, who most of you probably know here, has been around the industry for a long, long time. I think it would be great to see, you know, Twitter, LinkedIn talking more about it. They don't. I think Facebook does a pretty good job, right? But I think that's, yeah, we definitely need to get people to talk more about their usage there. There you go. Get the word out there. Questions? I see a hand up right here.
It appears that the security problems with the monoculture of network computers is finally reaching critical mass, and I wonder how that's going to impact open source.
So so the question is about the security problems of monocultures. I have a great talk that I give on, I started this with software quality, right? As how I got into open source. I have a great talk I give that just throws out all the stats and measurements around open source and quality. And one of them is days. One of the stats that's interesting to look at around security is days of vulnerability in systems, and that's the time. It's the time between vulnerabilities being identified and patched, and comparing proprietary systems versus open source systems, and the number of days of vulnerability. The patch times. One of the great things about open source is the time to fixes, the time to from a vulnerability, the time to when the vulnerability is identified to the fix being out there is far shorter. So if you look at the days in which your systems are vulnerable, based on those you know, available holes in the system, with open source, it's a lot less. It's a very, very compelling argument. I don't know how you can trust a system unless you can see the source code. Okay, and people have to understand that. How do you trust a black box? You know, sometimes you'll hear that myth, oh, because it's open source, people know how to hack it. Well, you know, that's exactly the wrong thought. Because it's open source, you can see if it's vulnerable. You know how to fix it. All right. So I think security is a prime reason for driving up open source adoption. How are we doing on time? We got for
Another question? Anyone?
another couple of questions? Anything here? Up front?
What's your opinion of companies using open source software, as you said, social cloud, mobile, but creating closed gardens? Doesn't that recreate the problem you have with?
I'm the question is, what do you feel about companies creating closed gardens using open source software? So I'm an advocate for open source software. At the same time, I'm very practical about business models that work and what you can do around software. I'll give you a great example of what you just described. Anybody out there got an Apple device on them? Come on, admit it. You guys, a lot of you guys have iPhones out there. I'll admit it. I got one of these. I've got an Android device in my bag though, so I'll switch when I get off the stage. But the iPhone is a great clock. Does anyone see that? It's a great clock. Where's the underlying software for this come from? You talk about a company that doesn't talk about open source, right? BSD, right? There's a lot of open source that drives the OS in this device. There's a lot of open source that drives Mac OS. And that's a company that I view as, you talk about proprietary. Okay, extremely closed, extremely proprietary, to the point of taking the device like this and having to approve and lock down every piece of software that you're allowed to run on the device. That's very, very closed. And yet, there's a lot of people out here in the audience, and this is an open source conference, using one of those devices. What's my point there? My point is that whether it's open source or not, people ultimately want great code, great product first. And we have to remember that sometimes in the open source community. Although open source gives you the control and it empowers you, and for all those reasons, it's compelling, if it's not the best software and the best product, the rest of that stuff takes second place. Okay? We don't always necessarily like that, but that's the truth. You can see it in the audience here. It's why so many people have these Apple devices. Apple does make good product there. It chafes me because I can't, you have to root the device to, you have to jailbreak it to put things you really want on it. I think that's a mistake on their part. I think they end up relegating themselves to a smaller section of the market, and I'm not sure that you look at the Android growth. I think that's a symptom of the fact that they have a closed ecosystem. And ultimately, those walled gardens end up being smaller than the open gardens. I think that's a fact of the way business grows, right? But the lesson that we should learn from that is we have to create great software and great product that is also open source. Okay? Great. I think we're on time. Thank you very much. Have a great conference. Really appreciate it being here. Great. Thank you, John. Thank you much.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. Guys, a couple of other housekeeping things. At 10 o'clock, we're going to start the breakout sessions. At 11:45, lunch will begin. And then we'll reconvene back here at 1 o'clock. Stephen Brodsky from IBM will speak. One thing that I've learned in all the conferences that I've been to is that there are some incredible people, folks that have really impacted the open source community. They're right here. John Mad Dog Hall, okay, Larry, Jim Jagelski over here. Look, let me tell you what, they're folks, take time to meet them and talk to them because they're really cool and they're really accessible. And that's one of the things I really love about the open source community. So thanks, go to the breakout sessions, and let's have a great show. Thank you.